The November air bit sharp against my cheeks as I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house that had shaped every quiet corner of my childhood. 42 Maple Street looked exactly as it always had. White colonial with forest green shutters, porch steps painted to perfection, and those ridiculous autumn wreaths my mother hung every year like shields against imperfection. The scent of roasted turkey drifted through the crisp air, mingling with wood smoke from neighboring chimneys, creating that suffocating embrace of forced tradition. But there, parked behind my father's pristine sedan, sat a car I hadn't seen in this driveway for 3 years. Sofia's old Honda, its faded blue paint and small dent in the rear bumper, like a rebellion against the neighborhood's polished veneer. My chest tightened. She had actually come. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood there longer than I should have, my breath forming small clouds in the cold, wrestling with the weight that had settled in my stomach the moment I'd received her text. "Going to Mom and Dad's for Thanksgiving. First time in forever. Wish me luck." I had stared at those words for an hour, knowing what they meant, knowing what this day would demand of all of us. The front door swung open before I could take another step, and there was my mother, Margaret, framed in warm yellow light like some Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Her smile was radiant, practiced, the same one she wore for church ladies and neighborhood committees. "Raphael, sweetheart." Her voice carried that musical quality she reserved for public moments. "You're just in time. Everyone's almost here." She pulled me into one of her careful hugs, the kind that wouldn't wrinkle her burgundy dress or disturb her perfectly styled hair. Over her shoulder, I caught a glimpse of the dining room, crystal glasses catching lamplight, her grandmother's china arranged like soldiers in formation, everything orchestrated for maximum impression. "Sofia's here," I said quietly, testing the waters. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Her smile tightened at the corners, her hand lingering a fraction too long on my arm. "Yes, well, we'll see how that goes." The warmth in her voice cooled by several degrees. "You know how your sister can be." I knew exactly how Sofia could be. Honest, uncompromising, unwilling to pretend that cruelty was love simply because it came wrapped in family tradition. "Margaret, close the door. You're letting the heat out." My father's voice carried from somewhere deeper in the house, that familiar blend of authority and irritation that had soundtracked my childhood. As I followed my mother inside, the house enveloped me in its familiar cocktail of vanilla candles, furniture polish, and that particular staleness that comes from windows that are never opened wide enough. Everything gleamed, the hardwood floors, the brass fixtures, the family photographs, arranged to tell the story my parents preferred. In most of them, Sofia appeared as a younger version of herself, before she'd committed the unforgivable sin of becoming exactly who she was meant to be. From the kitchen came the sound of voices, laughter, the clink of serving spoons against ceramic, Aunt Helen's distinctive cackle, Cousin David's booming greeting, the comfortable chaos of family gathering. But underneath it all, I could feel the tension humming like a wire pulled too tight, waiting for the smallest touch to snap it completely. This Thanksgiving wouldn't be like any other. I could feel it in my bones, and the way the house itself seemed to hold its breath. Something was going to break tonight. The only question was whether it would destroy us all, or finally set us free. The dining room buzzed with that peculiar energy of forced celebration, voices rising and falling like waves against the shore of propriety. I lingered in the doorway, watching the carefully choreographed dance of family gathering. Aunt Helen arranged napkins with military precision, while Uncle Tom carved the turkey with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Cousin David regaled anyone within earshot about his latest business venture, his voice carrying that desperate edge of someone trying too hard to fill silence. But my eyes found Sofia immediately. She stood near the bay window, her hand resting lightly on Michael's arm, both of them existing in a bubble of quiet isolation despite being surrounded by family. She looked different. Thinner, perhaps? Her dark hair shorter than I remembered, but there was something else. A hardness around her eyes that hadn't been there before, like armor she had learned to wear. Michael, tall and steady beside her, offered polite smiles to relatives who barely acknowledged his presence. I'd met him only twice before, at neutral locations Sofia had chosen carefully, coffee shops and parks where family politics couldn't poison the air. He was good for her, I could see that. The way he stayed close without hovering, how his presence seems to anchor her when the current threatens to pull her under. "All right, everyone, let's take our seats," my mother announced, her voice cutting through the chatter with practiced authority. She moved around the table like a general positioning troops, directing each person to their designated place. "Helen, you're here by Tom. David, next to your father. Raphael, sweetheart, right here beside me." And then, with a gesture so subtle it might have been accidental, she indicated the far end of the table for Sofia and Michael, the seats closest to the kitchen door, farthest from the head of the table where my father would preside. The message was clear without being spoken. You are here, but you are not welcome at the heart of this family. I watched Sofia's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly as she and Michael made their way to their assigned exile. But before they could sit, a voice cut through the orchestrated seating arrangement. "Sofia, dear, sit here next to me." Grandmother Evelyn, 87 years old and sharp as the carving knife, patted the chair beside her at the middle of the table, her cloudy blue eyes fixed on my mother with a look that brooked no argument. "These old bones need someone young to chat with." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. My mother's smile flickered like a candle in wind, her carefully laid plans disrupted by the one person whose authority in this house rivaled her own. "Of course, Grandma Evelyn," Sofia said softly, her voice carrying the first note of genuine warmth since I had arrived. As she settled into the chair, Evelyn's weathered hand covered hers briefly, a simple gesture that spoke volumes about loyalty and love that transcended petty judgments. My father emerged from the kitchen then, carrying the wine, his face set in its familiar mask of studied neutrality. He surveyed the table, noting the rearranged seating with a slight frown, but said nothing. Richard had perfected the art of speaking through silence, of making his disapproval known without ever risking the messy confrontation that words might bring. As I took my own seat, I felt the weight of what was about to unfold. The battle lines were drawn, alliances revealed in something as simple as where we chose to sit, and I realized, with a clarity that made my stomach clench, that I would soon have to choose a side. The clatter of silverware against china filled the initial moments as we settled into the rhythm of family dinner, that familiar symphony of polite conversation and careful navigation around emotional landmines. My father said grace with his usual economy of words, thanking God for blessings and family, as if checking items off a grocery list. The amen echoed around the table with varying degrees of conviction. "So," my mother began, her voice bright as freshly polished silver, "Helen was just telling me about David's promotion. Regional manager now. Isn't that wonderful?" She beamed at my cousin, who puffed up like a peacock at the attention. "It's so nice when hard work pays off, don't you think?" The barb was subtle, delivered with surgical precision. Sofia continued cutting her turkey with measured strokes, but I saw the slight tightening around her eyes. She knew exactly what my mother was doing, the same thing she had been doing for years, using other people's successes as weapons against her daughter's choices. "And what about you, Raphael?" Aunt Helen chimed in, clearly oblivious to the undercurrents. "Still working at the engineering firm?" "Yes, still there. Just finished a project designing a new water treatment facility for the county." "How impressive," my mother said, her pride genuine but pointed. "Such important work, helping the community. We're so proud of our Raphael." The emphasis on "our" was like a blade sliding between ribs. I caught Sofia's slight flinch and felt my own stomach twist with familiar guilt. How many times had I sat here, basking in praise that came at my sister's expense? My mother turned her attention to Sofia with the smile of a predator who'd cornered wounded prey. "And Sofia, dear, how are things with you? Still doing those creative ventures?" The way she said creative ventures made it sound like something distasteful, something to be scraped off the bottom of a shoe. Sofia looked up from her plate, her composure remarkable under the circumstances. "I'm working as a freelance graphic designer," she said evenly. "I just finished a campaign for a nonprofit that provides art therapy for trauma survivors. It was incredibly rewarding work." "Ah, therapy," my mother repeated, as if tasting something bitter. "How interesting. Though I suppose it must be difficult, not having the security of a real job, benefits, retirement plans, that sort of thing. Don't you worry about your future?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a smoldering fire. Uncle Tom cleared his throat uncomfortably. Cousin David suddenly found his mashed potatoes fascinating. Even the normally chatty Aunt Helen seemed to sense the danger and fell silent. I felt my jaw clench so hard it ached. This was exactly how it always went, my mother's passive aggression disguised as maternal concern, designed to make Sofia feel small and foolish for choosing passion over convention. And like always, I sat frozen in my chair, watching my sister endure the slow torture of 1,000 tiny cuts, while I said nothing. But today felt different. Today, the silence felt like complicity, and the taste of my own cowardice was becoming harder to swallow with each passing moment. The tension stretched like a violin string wound too tight when Michael, who had been quietly observing the verbal assassination of his partner, finally set down his fork. His movement was deliberate, controlled, but there was steel in his voice when he spoke. "Actually, Sofia's work has been featured in 3 major publications this year," he said calmly, his eyes meeting my mother's directly. "The trauma therapy campaign she mentioned, it helps secure funding for 5 new treatment centers across the state. Her art is literally helping people heal." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of discomfort around the table. My mother's smile faltered for just a moment, a crack in the perfect facade she'd maintained for so long. But she recovered quickly, that practiced politician's smile sliding back into place. "Oh, how lovely," she said, though her tone suggested anything but. "It's wonderful that Sofia has found fulfillment in her choices." The way she said fulfillment made it sound like a consolation prize, something people settled for when they couldn't achieve real success. But Michael wasn't finished. "She's also been commissioned to design the logo for the new children's hospital. Pro bono work, of course. Sofia believes in using her talents to make a difference." "That's enough," my father's voice cut through the conversation like a blade, sharp and final. His fork clinked against his plate as he set it down with controlled precision. "Thanksgiving isn't the time for arguments. We're here to be grateful for what we have, not to debate career choices." The dismissal was absolute, reducing Sofia's achievements to mere career choices and Michael's defense to an argument. It was vintage Richard, shutting down conflict not by addressing it, but by pretending it didn't exist, as if his words could magically restore the artificial peace he preferred. But Grandmother Evelyn, bless her weathered heart, chose that moment to let out a dry chuckle that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. "Well, I think it's wonderful that Sofia is helping children and trauma survivors. Reminds me of my own mother, actually. She used to paint portraits for families who couldn't afford photographs. Said art was just another way of showing love." She turned to Sofia with eyes that sparkled with mischief and warmth. "Course, back then, people called it women's work and acted like it didn't matter. Funny how some things never change, isn't it?" The barb hit its mark. My mother's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. But Evelyn's words had accomplished what Michael's facts couldn't. They'd reframed the entire conversation, turning Sofia from a disappointment into a continuation of family tradition. For a moment, The table fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the soft scrape of silverware and the distant sound of football commentary from the living room television. I watched this small act of rebellion unfold and felt something stir in my chest, a recognition that courage could come in small moments, in small gestures of solidarity. If Michael could speak up for Sofia, if Grandmother Evelyn could defend her with such graceful defiance, what was stopping me? The wine had been flowing steadily, loosening tongues and lowering the careful barriers that usually kept family dinners from descending into chaos. Aunt Helen's laugh had grown more raucous, Uncle Tom's stories more elaborate, and the general volume had risen to the point where individual conversations blended into a cacophony of forced merriment. But beneath the alcohol-fueled chatter, I could feel the pressure building like steam in a kettle. Every sideways glance, every loaded pause, every careful word choice added another degree of heat to the already volatile atmosphere. It was Cousin David who finally provided the spark, his voice cutting through the noise with the particular confidence that comes from 3 glasses of wine and a lifetime of being the golden child in his own family. "You know what I love about Thanksgiving?" he announced, gesturing broadly with his fork. "It's when we all come together and remember what really matters. Family, tradition, the values that bind us together." He raised his glass in a mock toast, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Here's to the people who stick around, who don't abandon ship when things get tough." The words hit the table like a physical blow. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly fascinated by their cranberry sauce, but my mother seized the moment like a general, recognizing the perfect tactical opportunity. "That's beautifully said, David." She beamed, her voice rich with approval. "It really is something special, having children who understand what family means, who know that sometimes sacrifice and compromise are necessary for the greater good." Her eyes found mine across the table, warm and proud. "Raphael has always understood that. He's always been such a good son, so thoughtful, so considerate of others' feelings." The praise washed over me like acid, burning away any remaining illusion I had about my place in this family dynamic. I wasn't the good son because of my inherent virtue. I was good because I was compliant, because I never rocked the boat, never challenged the narrative, never forced uncomfortable truths into the light. And my mother was wielding my compliance like a weapon against Sofia, using my silence as proof of Sofia's failure to measure up to some impossible standard of filial devotion. I looked across the table at my sister, watching her absorb this latest blow with the practiced stoicism of someone who had learned to expect nothing but cruelty disguised as love. Her hands were folded carefully in her lap, her face composed, but I could see the way her knuckles had gone white, the slight tremor in her jaw that betrayed the effort it took to remain silent. Sofia had built a life for herself, despite our parents' rejection. She'd found love, found purpose, found her own definition of success. And here she sat, enduring their casual cruelty one more time, probably wondering why she'd thought things might be different. The wine glass in my hand felt impossibly heavy. My throat constricted as if someone had wrapped invisible fingers around my neck, choking off words that desperately needed to be spoken. The familiar weight of family expectations pressed down on my shoulders, but for the first time it felt less like security and more like chains. Something had to give. Something had to break. And with sudden, crystalline clarity, I realized it might as well be me. The moment stretched like taffy, thick and suffocating until I found myself pushing back from the table. The scrape of my chair against the hardwood floor cut through the conversation like a knife, and suddenly every eye in the room was on me.
My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. I stood there for a moment, wine glass trembling slightly in my hand, feeling the weight of 30 decades of silence pressing down on my shoulders. This was it, the precipice I had been approaching all evening without realizing it. Behind me lay the safe harbor of compliance, of being the good son who never made waves. Ahead was uncharted territory, the kind that changed families forever. "I'd like to make a toast," I heard myself say, my voice sounding strange and distant in my own ears. My mother's face brightened immediately, relief washing over her features like sunrise after a storm. This was familiar territory. Raphael standing up to offer some pleasant sentiment, some safe expression of gratitude that would smooth over the evening's rough edges and restore the illusion of family harmony. "How lovely," she said, her voice warm with maternal pride. "Everyone, Raphael wants to say something." The chatter died away as faces turned toward me expectantly. Aunt Helen smiled encouragingly. Uncle Tom nodded approvingly. Cousin David raised his own glass in anticipation of whatever bland pleasantries I was about to deliver. Even my father looked up from his plate, his expression neutral but attentive. But when my eyes found Sofia's across the table, everything else fell away. She was watching me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness, as if she sensed something different in the air but couldn't quite identify what it was. Michael's hand had found hers on the table, their fingers interlaced in a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes about the love and support she'd found outside these walls.
"I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," I began, my voice growing steadier with each word. "For gathering around this table, for sharing this meal, for being family." So far, so safe. I could see my mother relaxing slightly, probably already composing the gracious response she'd offer once I finished. But then I took a breath, and everything changed. But I also want to acknowledge someone who shows incredible courage every single day. Someone who has faced rejection and judgment and still found the strength to build a beautiful life filled with love and purpose and meaning. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My mother's smile flickered like a candle in wind. My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Grandmother Evelyn's eyes sharpened with interest, while other relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing they were about to witness something unprecedented. "I want to toast my sister, Sofia," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence, "who taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept unacceptable treatment, who showed me that integrity matters more than approval." The words hung in the air like smoke, and I realized there was no going back now. The silence that followed my words was deafening, the kind of quiet that precedes earthquakes. I could feel the shift in the room's energy, the way oxygen seemed to have been sucked from the air. But I was past the point of retreat now, standing at the edge of the cliff, with nothing left to do but jump. For too long, I've sat at this table and watched. I've watched my sister be treated like a stranger, like a disappointment, like someone who doesn't deserve basic human decency. And I've said nothing, because I was afraid. Afraid of rocking the boat, afraid of losing my place as the good son. My mother's face had gone ashen, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish against her pale skin. "Raphael," she said, her voice tight with warning, "this isn't appropriate. We have guests. We have family." I cut her off, a surge of adrenaline making me bold. And family should mean safety, not judgment. It should mean acceptance, not conditional love that evaporates the moment someone chooses their own path. I turned to face Sofia directly, raising my glass higher. Her eyes had filled with tears, but she was sitting straighter now, as if my words were giving her permission to take up space she'd been denied for so long. "Sofia, you left home because staying would have meant sacrificing who you were meant to be. You chose authenticity over approval, And that took more courage than I have ever shown in my entire life. You've built something beautiful, a career that helps people heal, a relationship based on genuine love and respect, a life that reflects your values instead of other people's expectations. That's enough. My father's voice cracked like a whip across the table. His face was flushed, whether from wine or anger I couldn't tell. "You're being ridiculous, Raphael," he slurred slightly. "Sofia made her choices. Actions have consequences. You can't just do whatever you want and expect everyone to... To what?" I whirled on him, years of suppressed anger finally finding its target. "To love her anyway? To treat her like family? To show her the basic respect you'd show a stranger on the street?" My voice was rising now, carrying over the murmured protests and shocked gasps from around the table. "You want to know what's ridiculous? It's sitting here, year after year, pretending this is normal. Pretending that cruelty is somehow acceptable as long as we dress it up in tradition and good manners." I raised my glass one final time, my hand steady despite everything. "So here's to Sofia, for showing me what courage looks like, and for reminding me that being the good son means standing up for what is right, not staying silent in the face of wrong." The crystal touched my lips, and I drank deeply, sealing my declaration with the bitter taste of wine and the sweet release of truth finally spoken. The aftermath of my toast hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. My mother sat frozen, her face a mask of shock and fury, while my father's jaw worked silently as if he were chewing on words too bitter to swallow. The extended family seemed caught between flight and fascination, unsure whether to flee the scene or lean in for the inevitable explosion. But before anyone could respond, before my mother could launch her counterattack, or my father could deliver his verdict, Grandmother Evelyn slowly pushed back from the table. Her arthritis-gnarled hands gripped her walker as she struggled to her feet, and something in her bearing commanded absolute attention. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of 8 decades and secrets too long buried. My mother turned toward her, relief flickering across her features. Surely Grandma Evelyn would restore order, would chastise me for my outburst, and remind everyone about respect and family hierarchy. "Sit down, Mother," my father said gently. "You don't need to— Don't tell me what I need to do, Richard," Evelyn snapped with surprising fire. "I've been sitting quietly at this table for too many years, watching history repeat itself." Her cloudy eyes swept the room before settling on my mother. "Margaret, do you remember when you were 22 and came home pregnant, unmarried, scared out of your mind?" The words hit the table like a bomb. My mother's face went from pale to gray, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Several relatives leaned forward, their earlier discomfort forgotten in the face of this unexpected revelation. "Grandma," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible, but Evelyn wasn't finished. "Your father threw you out that very night, called you a disgrace, a disappointment, said you'd brought shame on the family name. You slept in my barn for 3 weeks while he refused to even speak your name." The room had gone dead silent, except for the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. I felt as if the ground beneath my feet was shifting, reality rearranging itself into patterns I'd never imagined. "The baby," Evelyn continued, her voice gentle but relentless, "you lost the baby in the 4th month, came back to my kitchen bleeding and sobbing, begging me not to tell anyone, terrified your father would find out you'd been weak enough to grieve for a child he'd already condemned." Tears were streaming down my mother's face now, years of carefully constructed armor cracking and falling away. "Please," she whispered, "please don't." "But you survived it," Evelyn said, her tone softening. "You found your way back, married Richard, built this life. But you never forgave that girl who made the mistake of falling in love with the wrong man at the wrong time. And now you're punishing Sofia for the same crime you once committed, the crime of being human, She turned to face the rest of us, her gaze steady despite her tears. "I watched my own daughter suffer for someone else's rigid ideas about right and wrong. I swore I'd never let it happen again, but I've been quiet too long, and now I'm watching my granddaughter suffer the same way." Evelyn's eyes found Sofia's across the table. "Child, you are not your grandmother's shame. You are her courage, finally set free." The revelation hung in the air like the acrid smell after lightning strikes, and for a moment, nobody moved. Then the dam broke. My mother rose abruptly from her chair, her face a mixture of humiliation and rage, tears streaming down her cheeks but her eyes blazing with fury. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "How dare you expose my private pain in front of everyone?" "Margaret," my father started, reaching toward her, but she jerked away from his touch as if it burned. "No," she said, her voice growing stronger, more desperate. "I won't sit here and be humiliated by my own family. In my own home." She looked around the table wildly, taking in the shocked faces, the uncomfortable silence, the weight of judgment she'd spent decades trying to escape. "This is exactly what I was trying to protect us from. The shame, the whispers, the way people look at you when they know your secrets." She turned on Sofia with the desperation of a cornered animal. "You think you're so brave, so righteous? You have no idea what it costs to live with people knowing your business, judging every choice you make. I was trying to save you from that." "By cutting me out completely?" Sofia's voice was soft but steady, the first word she had spoken since my toast began. "I was protecting this family's reputation," my mother shot back, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Whose reputation?" Sofia stood slowly, her composure remarkable given the chaos around us. "Yours, or the grandfather who threw you out when you needed him most?" The question struck like a physical blow. My mother staggered slightly, gripping the back of her chair for support. Around the table, relatives began to shift and murmur. Aunt Helen was gathering her purse, clearly ready to flee. Uncle Tom had already pushed back from the table, mumbling about getting home before the traffic got bad. Cousin David, his earlier bravado evaporated in the face of real family drama, was studiously avoiding eye contact with everyone. "I think we should go," Michael said quietly, placing a protective hand on Sofia's arm, but she shook her head. "No," she said, her voice carrying a strength I'd rarely heard before. "I've spent years running from this family's dysfunction. I'm not running anymore." My father, who had remained silent through the entire exchange, finally spoke. His voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of a man retreating into familiar detachment. "This has gone far enough. Margaret, go upstairs and compose yourself. Everyone else should probably leave." It was vintage Richard. Faced with genuine emotion, real confrontation, he simply shut it down and walked away. But this time, nobody moved to follow his directions. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos, "for once in your life, don't just pretend this isn't happening." He looked at me with eyes that held more weariness than anger. "What would you have me do, Raphael? Wave a magic wand and make 30 years of pain disappear?" "I'd have you choose," I replied. "Choose your daughter over your pride." The silence that followed was different from before. Not shocked or stunned, but expectant, as if the entire room was holding its breath to see what he would say. 3 hours later, I sat in my small apartment kitchen, watching Sofia cut leftover turkey into sandwiches while Michael heated soup on the stove. Grandmother Evelyn dozed in my reading chair, her walker parked beside her like a faithful companion. The scene felt surreal after the wreckage we had left behind on Maple Street. My father had never answered my challenge. He'd simply stared at me for a long moment, then walked out of the dining room without a word. My mother had fled upstairs, her sobs echoing through the house until they finally stopped, leaving only silence. The remaining relatives had scattered like leaves before a storm, mumbling awkward excuses and promises to talk soon that we all knew were lies. "I still can't believe you did that," Sofia said, spreading mustard on bread with careful precision. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear, as if a fever had finally broken. "All these years I thought you agreed with them." "I never agreed," I replied, accepting the sandwich she offered. "I was just too much of a coward to disagree out loud." "Fear and cowardice aren't the same thing," she said gently. "You were trying to survive in that house too." Michael ladled soup into mismatched bowls, his movements efficient and caring. "For what it's worth, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. You didn't just stand up for Sofia, you stood up for the truth." "Grandmother Evelyn did the heavy lifting," I said, glancing over at our sleeping ally. "I just opened the door. She walked through it carrying dynamite." Sofia laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her all day. "She's been waiting decades to drop that bomb. Did you see Mom's face?" I felt sorry for her, for about 30 seconds. Then I remembered every birthday you spent alone, every Christmas invitation you never got, every time she made you feel like loving the wrong person was an unforgivable sin. Michael sat down beside Sofia, his hand finding hers automatically. What happens now? The question hung in the air like incense. What did happen now? The family as we had known it was effectively destroyed. The careful facades had been stripped away, the polite lies exposed, the comfortable silences shattered beyond repair. "Now we build something better," Evelyn said from her chair, her voice soft but clear. We all turned, surprised to find her awake and listening. "Family isn't about blood, children. It's about choosing to love people even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient, even when other people think you're wrong." She struggled to sit up straighter, her cloudy eyes moving from face to face. "Your parents might come around someday. They might not. But you don't wait for broken people to fix themselves before you start living. You build your own family, one that chooses love over judgment, truth over comfort, courage over conformity." I looked around my small kitchen, at my sister, finally free from the weight of shame she'd carried for years, at Michael, whose quiet strength had helped her heal, at Evelyn, who'd spent 8 decades learning that silence in the face of cruelty was its own kind of sin. This was what Thanksgiving was supposed to feel like. Not perfect, not polished, but real, honest, built on foundations that could weather any storm. "To chosen family," I said, raising my water glass. "To chosen family," they echoed, and for the first time in my life, the words felt like home. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.